As new media takes on all powers,
we are as determined as ever to hold powerful and abusive organizations to account.
And cyber disobedience exposes powerful governments.
Free expression has its limits.
Websites treated as hostile territories.
If we lived in Great Britain, 007 would be getting him.
Leakers as terrorists.
A dead man can't leak stuff.
And hackers as insurgents. We ask, who will win the information wars? This is Empire. Hello and welcome to Empire, coming to you from the prestigious School of Journalism here at Columbia University in New York City for the second in our two-part series about the power of information in the age of globalization and how it transforms our lives and the relationship between people and power. Once upon a time, the world got its news from just a few sources.
This is London.
But those once all-powerful voices
That's the way it is.
are now competing with an ever-multiplying cacophony.
Live from Moscow.
There are hundreds of news channels around the world. Any citizen with a cell phone or a laptop can be a reporter of sort.
Have a good evening, go out and register to vote.
What we're talking about now is a kind of explosion around data that is transforming the very idea of news.
We stand for a single internet where all of humanity has equal access to knowledge and ideas.
But that makes it impossible for governments or corporations to control their most powerful currency, information. Even in the bastion of free speech, the USA, the conflict continues between a government determined to keep its secrets and whistleblowers even more determined to disclose them. 30 years ago, as the Vietnam War raged, the New York Times published the Pentagon Papers and brought the wrath of the US government down on Daniel Ellsberg, the young military analyst who leaked them.
They took a number of criminal actions against me, including an attempt to incapacitate me totally. Those were their words explicitly, to incapacitate Daniel Ellsberg totally, which could have meant anywhere from killing me to perhaps just putting me in the hospital for some time.
Soon after, the president was forced to resign after stunning revelations by two Washington Post reporters, aided by a whistleblower known only as Deep Throat.
Nothing's riding on this except the First Amendment of the Constitution, freedom of the press, and maybe the future of the country.
Today, whistleblowers go global instantly. Wikileaks is shaking the world, posting shocking videos.
Light them all up. Come on, fire!
Hundreds of thousands of classified documents about the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and a treasure trove of reports and diplomatic cables that embarrassed leaders from Kenya to Argentina. Julian Assange founded Wikileaks.
Media has a right and an obligation to the public to get out information that the public needs to know.
But many in the US disagree.
If we lived in Great Britain, 007 would be getting him.
He needs to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and if that becomes a problem, we need to change the law.
Julian Assange is engaged in terrorism.
I would argue that it's closer to being a high-tech terrorist than the Pentagon Papers.
Have over 2,000 sites now across the world. They're going to have to take down all 2,000 if they want to stop the release of this material.
The American government is investigating whether it can charge Assange with espionage. Meanwhile, Private Bradley Manning, the 22-year-old suspected of being behind the largest leak of state secrets in history, has been in maximum security custody since last July. Today, the free flow of information is overturning autocrats across the Arab world. Who knows where the next domino will fall? Joining me to discuss the challenge of new media to governments and governed to the dictators and the dictated is Carl Bernstein. You are a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter who famously helped oust a president. Amy Goodman, best-selling author and the dame of multimedia's Democracy Now! Professor Emily Bell, Director of Digital Journalism here at Columbia University and formerly at the British Guardian newspaper. Clay Shirky, you're a professor, author, and guru of new media. And last but not least, Yevgeny Morozov, cyber skeptic and author of The Net Delusion, The Dark Side of Internet Freedom. Ladies, gents, welcome to Empire. Carl, let me start with you. What's the difference between these WikiLeaks phenomena and those in the 60s and the 70s, from the Watergates, Pentagon Papers, and so on?
Well, first of all, the WikiLeaks involves the dissemination of raw information by an organization determined to simply disseminate that information without commenting on it, basically, without putting it into context. Yes, we have these fabulous new tools and much greater speed that we have to be much more careful about context and sometimes slowing down to get it right. That an intricate part of the political process, particularly that of free nations and becoming free, has been information going back to the American Revolution, to broadsides put up on trees. That's how information spread. So all I'm suggesting is that this is somewhat a continuum. And I would choose to look at WikiLeaks in that continuum rather than an isolated phenomenon.
In fact, WikiLeaks wouldn't have had the exposure it had without the New York Times, the Guardian, Der Spiegel, and so on and so forth. So actually, traditional media is still key.
Yeah, I think it played a very significant role in amplifying the WikiLeaks story. I might argue that it hasn't necessarily been that helpful in describing context, because certainly in the latter stages of the story, it became very much about Julian Assange and his personal hygiene and the state of his socks, and much less about the actual material that was in the cables and those stories that were being reported but moved on from, not by the new media actually, but by the old media really very quickly. And I think what we have is a partnership between the old and the new. And I think we have more truth and if you like, a kind of a clearer and more sort of disseminated version of that than we had before.
I don't disagree with what you're saying. I believe in the web. I believe in these instruments. What I'm also concerned about, though, is that we take the best of the standards of old media. And some of that is necessary to vet and shape information in the new formats as well. But it also means that anybody in this room or anywhere else can start and give millions of people access to false information.
Before we get to the content and context, actually, Amy, the actual medium is under attack. Such websites now are considered enemy territory, and the people who run them as terrorists. Is this a freedom of expression, or is this cybersecurity, or is this national security that we're talking about?
I mean, it's very frightening to hear people like the Vice President of the United States talk about WikiLeaks as perhaps a terrorist organization. I mean, WikiLeaks has profoundly changed the way we get information. I am reminded years ago, coming out of reporting on East Timor when it was occupied by Indonesia, and we had gotten some documents under Freedom of Information Act that showed that Kissinger, way back when Indonesia invaded, had warned his colleagues at the State Department when he was Secretary of State not to say anything about the U.S. weapons flow to Indonesia that was being used to kill the people of East Timor. And when my colleague Alan Nairn asked him the question, said, "I am holding the documents right here," Kissinger said, "It's because of people like you that we cannot conduct diplomacy the way we expect to conduct diplomacy." Okay, let's go forward 20.
Kissinger once.
Let's go back. Let's go forward now. This is exactly what is happening in the age of WikiLeaks, is that governments that thrive in darkness, when sunlight is shed on them, they cannot stand up. So you see what happened in Tunisia. It was because of the incredible resilience of the Tunisian people, but also because of documents released by WikiLeaks, and then that spread to Egypt.
Clay, revolutionary then?
Well, you know, if you use the word revolutionary, it's always subject to critiques on both sides.
You know, we are all inspired by Egypt's revolution.
Yeah,
so
no,
now
exactly.
everything is a revolution.
That is a genuine, Tunisia, Egypt, genuine revolutions, but that you can always find evolutionary precursors to anything you want to call a revolution in technology. So it's a kind of a meaningless term in a lot of cases. I think it's worth talking in some specificity about what Julian actually did. And the first was to marshal the best technical work on maintaining the secrecy of the sources. So we could go to potential leakers and say, if you leak to me, no one will find out by listening in between. There are some hundreds of people in the world talented enough to do what Julian did, but he was the one who, with his team, sort of made this happen. The second innovation was not just distributed storage against technical attack, but distributed storage against legal attack. There is no one nation state whose laws or the reach of their police force can shut down WikiLeaks. So it is the first transnational organization, and we saw that play out when we tried extra-legal attempts to shut them down. The big innovation in WikiLeaks is not the technical innovation around secrecy of leakers, but the distribution of the site of the leaks so that you can't use any set of national rules to shut it down. Right? Anyone leaking any document today, and I think from now on, will choose not to leak it to the national press of the country the secrets are about, because you would much rather go to a source that your own country can't reach, rather than doing it, as happened with the Pentagon Papers, entirely within one nation.
But Yevgeny, I guess international regulations are also possible. I'm sure governments will have an interest in that.
Well, I think in some sense WikiLeaks was lucky because it got itself a nice enemy, the government of the United States, which is constrained in many respects by the rule of law. Had they pulled the same trick on the Kremlin, it would not be about the rule of law that we'd be talking about. We'd be talking about attempts to shut down WikiLeaks by physical force, and poisoning and what else, right? We know that their toolkit is much broader than just international law. So in that sense, I'm not sure how revolutionary that really is. And again, we have seen pressure. I think it was actually very successful. I still don't see WikiLeaks returning to Amazon or to PayPal or to Visa or to MasterCard, right? So in some sense, their work is still constrained by the fact that they cannot easily receive donations online. They cannot host themselves as easily with American servers. So in some sense, I think the nation state did strike back.
One thing that I think Julian has done is he's created enough of an advertisement for the structure of WikiLeaks that he's built the ecosystem in which WikiLeaks is now being competed with. So you look at Daniel Domscheit-Berg and OpenLeaks, the new service that essentially operates as a more white-labeled Dropbox. Or you look at the Palestine Papers, which was up on the screen a moment before. What I think Palestine
That's Al Jazeera's Palestine paper.
Right, of course, Al Jazeera's Palestine paper. I forgot I was paid per product placement. Al Jazeera and The Guardian's Palestine Papers says you can get transnational distribution of material without having to build a novel transnational organization. And the threat of, to governments that want to keep secrets, to Amy's point, the threat of transnational networks that are built out of existing news organizations is actually considerably harder to constrain, not against poisoning, obviously, if somebody wants to go there, but there's not nearly as much of a single titular head of the Palestine Papers operation as there was of anything WikiLeaks has ever done. So the pattern is already becoming more general.
Amy, is the genie out of the bottle, you think?
Oh, what has happened now is beyond extraordinary and beyond significant. And we see the effects when this information gets out. I mean, we are seeing a rolling revolution, rebellion in the Middle East. And I think there is a direct relationship. Now, I do think that people make revolutions, not technology, but technology facilitates it. When Egypt shut down the internet, still people worked out a way around it. Even when they couldn't communicate with each other digitally, there was their experience where they came out on the streets the old-fashioned way. But it sure puts it on steroids, and it transmits it in a way we have never seen before. And now national newspapers, like the New York Times, like the Washington Post, they are also challenged in an extremely important way because they have been the gatekeepers for so long, deciding whether information gets out. I mean, even the New York Times with the Pentagon Papers, it was more than a year that they held on to the papers that Dan Ellsberg got to them, to the point where he didn't even think they were going to release them. Now, they've got to do it because it's going to come out anyway.
The pressure of the new media, among others. And that's where I want to come back to you, Carl. isn't the excitement about the new media, about WikiLeaks, because of the failures of you guys back in the traditional media? You stopped doing your job. You're too much in bed with power. You are embedded in war. You are embedded in politics. You hang out with each other in the same bars, same restaurants in Washington. That's why there's excitement about the new media.
That's what Woodward and I said was the problem with most of the national press at the time of Watergate. I think that's always been true, and that's why I said that really most great journalism has always been exceptional. All I'm trying to say is that most great journalism has always been exceptional, not the norm. But I think maybe we're just playing with some words here, but I would look at WikiLeaks as evolutionary, not revolutionary. I think the point that you're making about the idea that it is supranational boundaries is the important one to make. We've had, for instance, before WikiLeaks, we had a similar Dropbox in structure to some extent at the National Security Archive. So it's not revolutionary, it's evolutionary.
But it's access. Now it's popular access all over the world. Even if it's at somewhere, the National Security Archive, who has access to that?
Well, that's one of the great things that the web does, is it lets everybody have access. All I'm trying to say is that I think that the failure of WikiLeaks to edit some of the information in its possession that might have endangered some people's lives was a failure. I think a traditional news organization perhaps would have done that. Do I think nonetheless that WikiLeaks shouldn't be out there putting information? Look, national security, people with vested national security concerns have been yelling, traitor, you're giving away national security secrets, whether it's Henry Kissinger. That cry has been going on forever. As Ben Bradley once said, whenever I hear the cry of national security, I know it's a red herring.
Well, let me tell you what the problem with that now, and I just need to go back to my digital revolutionary here and talk about how this is becoming, in fact, dangerous, as the most liberal of all presidents in recent memory had just appointed cyber general, 4-star general. So the territory between freedom of expression and cybersecurity and national security now is quite gray.
The race that we're talking about between secrecy and pressure to disclose has definitely moved into a new territory. And as in fact you were talking about pan-national news organizations, I was thinking this morning about the role of something like Google, which is actually kind of almost at the point where it itself has transcended national borders. In the last 3 weeks, we've seen a change at the head of Google. We understand that one of the reasons that Larry Page, who is now chief executive, perhaps fell out with his previous chief executive was because they disagreed on China and how to approach that. We have seen an executive of Google in prison in Egypt for being an agitator and a dissenter, and I can't think of any example before where an American executive has been put in prison for trying to bring down a dictatorship. I'm sure if you've propped a few up in the past.
Although in that case, I don't think Google deserves the credit. I
no,
think
and Google probably doesn't deserve the credit,
but
they also produced a workaround with Twitter through a piece of technology called Say Now, which allowed people to phone outside the internet ban and produce their work in. And I thought this is a very interesting moment because, as you say, all of these sort of tectonic plates are shifting at the same moment. And you suddenly see these kind of like really significant organizations thinking about what is our place and what is our branding and what's our attitude towards this openness and this world. And you're almost getting to a point where it's not just the press, it's not just government, it's not just the military. Everybody has to kind of have a view on this because you're all now in the same playground.
The question that we think of it in terms of cyber, we think of it as global and universal, but at the end of the day, there's someone sitting on a keyboard somewhere doing something, and hence they are accountable to a law somewhere. Mm-hmm. So is there really that kind of a freedom that works in an abstract, or in the end of the day, everyone is going to be subjected to some sort of accountability of some kind?
Well, again, if you look at what the Department of Justice is doing in terms of pursuing 5 of supporters of WikiLeaks, there are definitely still physical people using physical computers and physical locations, right? So there is evidence to go after them, and the United States government is pursuing its own vendetta, if you will, against WikiLeaks. So from that perspective, I mean, we're still tied very much to national borders national laws. So I don't think that that has been abolished. On the question of WikiLeaks itself, I think it's very important not to focus too much on technology. Yes, they've built this wonderful capacity to submit documents, and you can do it anonymously. But again, the power to vet the documents and to actually redact the documents still does not reside with WikiLeaks. It resides with their partners. That's why they turn to The Guardian, The New York Times, and others. They don't have the capacity yet. They don't have the kind of analysts that Human Rights Watch has to analyze this data. And this is why I'm so uncertain about their future, because if they really want to be a powerful player, they'll need to stop being this very exciting gig shop, and they need to turn themselves into a boring NGO, right? And I'm not sure that that's something that Julian Assange wants to do at this point, right? So I think this is one area where I think we need to curb our own enthusiasm about WikiLeaks because, again, they are as successful as their partners.
So I think it's also worth saying that actually when you listen to the editors of the New York Times and the Guardian talking about this and you read the very detailed accounts that they've rushed out books on, it's also clear to me that actually the kind of traditional media doesn't have the capacity for this either. That the physical capacity to process what's actually less than 10% of the release cables, and then actually to kind of carry on being across the story, as it were. I don't think any of the editors had even thought about what might happen in Tunisia when the cables came out. That, you know, it's stretched not just the capacity issues with WikiLeaks, I think it's highlighted capacity issues and appetite for long and detailed and difficult stories in the mainstream press as well.
The question for governments, and help me out here, Yevgeny, is that if you do shut down the internet, if you do handle technology as an instrument of an enemy, your economy goes down with it as well.
If your survival is at stake, you probably would rather survive and suffer a 50% loss in your GDP than be overthrown, right? As we have seen in the case of Egypt, where Mubarak did keep it down for 7 days or so, right? I think his mistake was that he did it very late in the game.
Well, actually, President Bashir said that he's going to take on the opposition through Facebook.
There is a tremendous amount of learning by dictators as well. I mean, now we're seeing in Sudan that their security forces actually put up fake Facebook pages to get protesters to show up in a given place and then arrested them.
So oppositions and people and so on are using this medium, but governments are learning. So the New York Times probably reflects this dilemma. Amy, the title goes like this: Syria reopens internet access. Watch out, there might be spying on those using it.
And it's not only Middle Eastern countries, it's U.S. corporations. I mean, let's talk about, for example, Sunnydale, California, the corporation Naris, which is owned by Boeing, which sold the the surveillance equipment to Egypt, right? That they could do DPI, deep packet inspection, so they can actually geolocate the dissident voices. This is very serious. We have to look at when corporations are accomplices to despots.
What has occurred that is so threatening to despots is the availability to reach so many people so quickly and to permeate borders and to permeate physical things that were impenetrable.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining Empire. We're going to have to wrap it up. And Columbia University, thank you for having us over. So who's the mystery man standing behind Omar Slimane? Physically stood behind the infamous vice president of Egypt as he announced his boss's resignation. The mystery has gone viral on the web, where Facebook and Twitter pages were set up especially to uncover the identity of the man behind Slimane. One joked that he's the angel of death. So widespread the speculation that one predicted that the unseated Omar Slimane has changed his name to the one standing in front of the man standing behind Slimane. Finally, the mystery's man's son clarified on Facebook that his father is Lieutenant Hassan Sharif and asked for an apology. A special Facebook page was set up to receive the apology, and some spectacular 50,000 signed in no time. So what lessons are we to draw from this? Well, first, a picture can be worth more than 1,000 websites. Second, thousands of bloggers may not do justice to a single image. And third, if you're lucky enough to personally witness the downfall of a dictator, wink at the camera. Those days come once in a lifetime. And that's the way it goes. write to me at empire@aljazeera.net or go to our website. Until next time.